Today, a sudden crypto sell-off sends Bitcoin and Ether plunging. U.S. officials ask for an independent investigation into Celsius, and another troubled crypto lender lays off 80% of its employees. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Jordan Smith. Major cryptocurrencies are plummeting alongside a morning sell-off on Wall Street. By noon Eastern, Bitcoin plunged to $21,000, Ether fell below $1,700, and Cardano tumbled to 47 cents. Today's losses mean Bitcoin and Ether have slumped more than 10% in the past week. Both cryptocurrencies are also down more than 50% since the start of the year. All right, on to the top stories. First, U.S. officials want an investigator to look into Celsius. The U.S. trustee, which handles bankruptcies, filed a motion to appoint an independent examiner to look into possible, quote, significant transparency issues. The officials said an examiner was essential to providing the court and creditors with clarity into Celsius's business practices ahead of its collapse. Celsius announced on Tuesday that a special committee was already looking into allegations of misconduct at the company. Next up, another crypto lender is facing an investigation. Hodlnaut announced Singapore's Attorney General and police had launched a probe into the company and said it believed the investigation was in the best interests of its users. The company also announced it was laying off 80% of its staff, or about 40 employees, to, quote, reduce the company's expenditures. Hodlnaut froze withdrawals on its platform at the start of August and now says it will be changing interest rates on its platform to 0%. Last, South American e-commerce giant Mercado Libre is launching its own cryptocurrency. The token is called Mercado Coin and will launch in Brazil as part of a loyalty program. Customers can earn cash back in the form of Mercado Coin, which can be spent on future purchases or cashed out. The token will start at 10 cents each and is expected to launch by the end of August. Okay, for our main story of the day, we're turning back to markets. Crypto World's Pippa Stevens spoke to Bruno Ramos de Sousa of Hashdex about what's weighing on crypto prices and his outlook for the rest of 2022.
Okay, Bruno, so give us your take on the state of crypto markets. Ether was having its worst week since July. What's putting pressure on digital currencies right now?
I think as always, as we've seen in the past a couple of months, there's still a lot of relation to what's happening with central banks, especially with the Fed interest rate. So in that sense, crypto is a little bit like a canary in the coal mine for what's happening in risk assets. You usually see it move before you see it, trying to get a little bit more exciting as you've seen in the past month or so. But then when you have moments like yesterday and some signals that these higher interest rates, they might last some more time, then crypto, holds back a little bit. So it's what we're seeing. It's in line with other risk assets in that sense. I think the big difference there when you talk about correlation is that sometimes Bitcoin and ETH, they do their own movement because of their own reasons, right? So that's what's happening with Ether right now.
So the Fed is clearly a big factor here and really impacting assets across the board. And looking beyond that, what kind of catalysts are there for crypto, and have investors kind of looked beyond Ether's merge?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. When you see technological advancements like the merge, that's something that has been creating some interesting pressure there, but also real world solutions to things that start coming along, and people start realizing that there's a lot beyond price action. We saw an announcement today of Mercado Libre launching its currency, its token based on Ether. So these things you're going to see more and more happening, and people getting connected and understanding. Just like today we talk about Bitcoin and Ether. In the past, when we talk about Bitcoin, it's reasonable to think that at some time we'll be speaking about more digital assets doing their different value proposals, bringing their solutions to the market. So that in addition to just pure price movement from financial markets, you're going to see developments in the tech, and people will respond to that.
And given all of these macro factors that are impacting price movements, do you have any sort of target in the short term and maybe the longer term for where you expect prices to head?
Yeah, I think for this year, we expect Bitcoin especially to be in this range that it is between 20 and 30, 18, 32. This is, we don't expect to see any big changes unless there's something big that happens, right? And there are a number of things like from Russia, China, and other macro factors that can affect that. But with time, we're very positive on the outcome, especially when you start looking at a longer term, 2, 3, 5 years. It's always been our expectation here at Hashdex that as crypto assets start to develop and deliver solutions to real world problems, price appreciation is natural in that scenario, right?
So that range that you said between 20 and 30,000 or 32,000, that's still well below where Bitcoin was not so long ago.
Yeah, yeah, that frenzy that we saw last year probably takes some time for another movement like that to come back. But Bitcoin has been doing this for over 10 years now. These periods of really being sort of in a slow mode, and then we see 4 or 5 months in which a lot happens, right? So we should never count Bitcoin out. At this point, it makes sense to expect that it will come back strongly at some point.
And going back to the Federal Reserve's tightening cycle, how much is Bitcoin reacting and how much are digital currencies more broadly reacting to recession fears, given that those have been in the market for the past few months at this point? Is that still really having that much of an impact?
Yeah, it does, especially when you look at countries that have been used to working in high interest rate environments. Brazil's a good example of that. What you see is investors flocking towards fixed income products just because you have a low risk and a very decent return when you compare it to inflation, depending on the size of the interest rates in that country. So it's a natural movement. This is still happening, and investors still react to that, right?
You also mentioned that longer term, there might not be any bullish catalysts for digital currencies at the moment, but that longer term you still are optimistic. So what are some of those catalysts that could ultimately turn the tide and lift Bitcoin and others back to their prior highs?
Yeah, so one big thing is regulation, right? We've seen comments on regulation for several years, but this time it's finally coming in a more advanced stage in many countries, starting with the US. So President Biden's executive order from this year will start rolling out its effects probably next year. We're going to see a comprehensive bill regulating exchanges, the custodians, and stable coins, and so on and so forth. So that should give clarity to crypto entrepreneurs and companies, and that should be a factor. Of course, in the US, there's always expectation around the Bitcoin spot ETF. At this point, it's a very old discussion. It's been going on since 2013. Interesting thing is that we have ETFs like this and ETPs in several places in Canada and Brazil and Europe. So in that sense, the US is lagging behind a little bit. But when it does come, it will open up the gates for institutional money here in the US. Those are two big factors just coming out of regulation. And the other thing is just how central banks behave globally, not only the Fed and what happens in other places. And this is very interesting because sometimes you see discussions around Bitcoin, especially being very US and European centric, and forgetting that most countries, they have not very good currencies, not very stable currencies, and having a currency that's not dependent on the government of that specific period is something that might be interesting for several countries, as we see folks in Argentina, Turkey, Lebanon today really using Bitcoin, for instance, and other cryptocurrencies as a store of value, as a means of exchange. So these are things that will continue to develop.
And then we've also seen kind of a return of the meme trade in some respects in recent weeks. And does that have any bearing on the activity in crypto?
Yes, it does. I mean, if we remember what happened in the GameStop era, you see also Dogecoin at the same time. So this will fit right in, and we're seeing Shiba and Dogecoin, these funny assets, still live there, still trying to do some things. Of course, it's not going to be, I don't think, as big as it was, last year, just because there isn't the exuberance that we had last year. So things are a little bit more toned down. But you should never count these assets out because, in the end, if there's a sentiment, the market sentiment around it, there will be people willing to buy it and sell it.
All right, that's all for this week, but we'll be back again on Monday with a whole lot more, so we'll see you then.